Ely Granger's boots hit the gravel with a crunch as he stepped down from his truck, dust swirling in the fading heat of a Sunday evening. The wind carried the distant moan of machinery, an unnatural sound on his quiet ranch. His brow furrowed. That noise didn't belong here. He followed it across the pasture, heart thudding. The fence line had been snapped. His land, carved open like a gutted deer, a yellow backhoe dug greedily into the earth, flanked by wide, black PVC pipe that snaked along the trench like a coiled predator. 4 workers in bright vests moved with purpose, too fast to be new and too confident to be uncertain. Ely waved his arms, yelling over the engine noise. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" One of the workers pointed. A man in a hard hat stepped forward, clipboard in hand, and boredom in his eyes. "Water pipeline, Chestnut Ridge Valley HOA project. Didn't you get the notice?" Ely's voice cracked with rising fury. "This is my land. You're trespassing." The man didn't flinch. "You'll want to take that up with the HOA, sir. We're just the contractors. It's all been approved." Ely's blood ran cold. Chestnut Ridge Valley, the neighboring development, a sprawling mess of vinyl fences and manicured lawns, was at least half a mile off. He'd avoided them for years. He didn't attend their meetings. He didn't vote. He wasn't even in their development. He owned ranch land, not a cul-de-sac. But here they were, digging straight through the edge of his northern pasture, a place his cattle grazed, a place sacred to him and his late father. Ely stormed back to his truck, fingers trembling as he fumbled with his phone. He called the county office. Closed for the weekend, he called the sheriff's department. The deputy sighed and asked if anyone was threatening him. "Not yet," Ely growled. "But if they keep cutting into my damn land, they might." The deputy promised to look into it, which Ely knew meant exactly nothing. He turned his truck toward the HOA clubhouse. It sat like a pretentious courthouse just past the gated entrance to Chestnut Ridge, adorned with fake columns and a fountain that never worked. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered over a group of smug board members seated around a plastic table. Ely didn't knock. Karen Mallow, HOA president for the last 7 years and self-appointed queen of the subdivision, raised an eyebrow as he barged in. "You're digging through my ranch," Ely snapped. "Your pipeline project. Who gave you permission?" Karen tilted her head, pulled a manila folder from her tote, and slapped it on the table. She slid it toward him. "Old easement," she said sweetly. "Filed back in 74. You should do your homework, Mr. Granger." He scanned the document. It was vague, too vague. Just a line on a map and legal jargon about utility access. "That's not permission," Ely growled. "It's theft." Karen smiled like she'd already won. "No, Mr. Granger, you just lost." And with that, she stood and walked out, leaving the smell of printer ink and smugness behind. Ely stared after her, fists clenched. He didn't know how yet, but this wasn't over. Not even close. Ely Granger had never stepped foot inside the Chestnut Ridge Valley clubhouse before today. Now, he felt like he needed a shower just standing in the lobby. The place reeked of artificial lavender and superiority. Photos of community events, barbecues, HOA holiday decorating contests, pool days, lined the walls, every one of them polished and pristine. Not a patch of mud or a calloused hand in sight. Behind the glass doors of the conference room, the HOA board sat like royalty in plastic chairs. Karen Mallow, in her power blazer and pastel lipstick, sat dead center. Her smile stretched too wide, too smug. Ely pushed the door open without invitation. Conversations died. Phones dropped. Everyone stared. "Well," Karen said brightly, "look who finally joined us." Ely slapped the easement folder on the table. "I want answers. Now." Karen didn't even glance at the papers. "You already have them. That trench cuts through my pasture, my private property. You're claiming a 50-year-old plat gives you the right to build a pipeline through my land." She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms like she was settling in for a show. "It's all legal. Easement was granted when the parcels were surveyed, back before your father passed, I believe. The HOA has every right to make improvements for the benefit of the community." "This community?" Eli spat. I'm not part of your subdivision. I've got cattle, not garden parties. Karen didn't blink. And yet, your land was part of the original Lockridge Township subdivision filing. Our legal team has reviewed it. A beady-eyed man in a cheap suit, Eli guessed legal team, nodded without meeting his gaze. But don't worry, Karen added, her voice dipping into something falsely sweet. You'll barely notice the pipe. Once it's buried, the grass will grow back. We even have native seed mix in the budget. Eli's jaw clenched. You think this is over? Karen smiled wider. No, Mr. Granger. I know it is. You see, when people don't pay attention to the fine print, they lose the right to complain later. You ranchers live in the past. The rest of us, we read the future. Someone behind her chuckled. Eli scanned the room. Not a single ally. Not a single ounce of doubt on their faces. He picked up the folder and walked out. They thought they had buried him with that easement. But Eli Granger wasn't a man who gave up just because the odds were stacked against him. On the drive home, he called his cousin, retired surveyor, 50 years in the field, sharp as a tack. I need you to pull every deed, map, and water filing on my ranch, Eli said, especially anything with old rights or subsoil claims. Sounds serious, his cousin said. What's going on? They ran a pipe under my land, Eli replied, voice low and tight, but they forgot who owns what's under it. He ended the call and stared out at the fading horizon. The sun dipped low behind his hills, but Eli didn't see dusk. He saw opportunity. The next morning, Eli pulled up to his cousin Roy's place with a fresh thermos of black coffee and 2 folders stuffed with documents. Roy Granger was the type of man who could trace a boundary line straighter than a rifle shot at 300 yards. He was retired, yes, but Eli knew retirement hadn't dulled his instincts. His garage still smelled like paper maps, topo ink, and old whiskey. Roy opened the thermos, took a swig, and flipped through the first file. Damn, he muttered. They're using a utility easement clause from '74. That's thin ice, cousin, real thin. Eli leaned on the dusty workbench. They're saying it gives them full right to run that water pipe across my pasture. Roy grunted, pulling a yellowed parcel map from a drawer. He laid it on the table and pointed to the northeast corner, exactly where the trench now cut through Eli's land. See this, he said, jabbing the faded label, Lockridge Township Parcel C4. That was your daddy's original plot, sold to him before the HOA even existed. Which means, he trailed off and flipped through a second folder. His fingers found a copy of the 1948 land deed, the original. They screwed up, Roy said, grinning. Eli leaned in. How bad? Roy tapped a paragraph near the bottom of the page. The legalese was dense, but one line stood out like a strike of lightning across a dark sky. Grantor retains full mineral, oil, and water rights beneath said parcel in perpetuity. Eli stared. They didn't get the water rights. Nope, Roy confirmed. They got surface easement permission, meaning they can walk across your grass. But that pipe? That's subsurface activity, and every drop of water it carries. He tapped the page again. That's yours. Eli felt something settle in his chest. Cold, sharp, and patient. They're pumping my water, he said, more to himself than Roy. Built their whole pipeline without even checking who owned what's underneath. Roy raised a brow. That's not just a legal misstep. That's a multi-million-dollar screw-up waiting to blow. Eli nodded, already thinking ahead. I need to know who manages the water permits for this county. Roy chuckled. Still got connections. I'll make a few calls. As he left the garage, Eli stopped and turned. They think I'm some old ranch hand with a short fuse and no clue what's on paper. They think I'll scream and punch walls and get tired. Roy grinned. But you're gonna bury him with patience instead. No, Eli said, stepping into the sun. I'm gonna drown him with their own pipe. He got into his truck, a storm quietly building behind his calm eyes. If the HOA thought the dirt was theirs, they were about to learn just how deep Eli Granger's roots and rights ran. 2 weeks passed, and not a word was spoken between Eli and the HOA. Not at meetings, not in letters, Not on his land. They assumed he'd gone quiet. He hadn't. Ely had gone hunting. From the back of his truck, he opened a laptop older than most HOA board members' grandkids. It was slow, dusty, and loaded with legal databases Roy helped him access years ago. With Roy's connections and a few coffee-fueled nights, Ely found exactly what he needed. The groundwater under Chestnut Ridge didn't just come from his ranch. It was part of a larger aquifer system, stretching beneath 4 counties, parceled and leased out to developers, farms, and utilities. Years ago, during a drought scare, the county began offering commercial access permits to manage supply. Most homeowners didn't even know the water under them wasn't technically theirs. And someone had missed a big one. Lot 14B, the center of the aquifer, sat unclaimed. Ely made a quiet call to a water rights attorney in Tulsa. Not under his name, of course. He formed a shell company using his grandfather's initials, HOA Resources, LLC. 3 days and $8,500 in filing fees later, he owned the beating heart of the aquifer that fed the HOA pipeline. No press release, no announcement, just a quiet stamp of approval, filed by the county water office under a name no one would think to question. He didn't stop there. He contacted a water management firm and submitted a notice of withdrawal suspension under his LLC, legally halting all unlicensed water movement from Lot 14B until further review. And then came the masterpiece, a certified letter delivered to the HOA clubhouse by courier, to the board of Chestnut Ridge Valley HOA. You are hereby notified that effective immediately, all water extraction activities from the subsurface Lot 14B aquifer are suspended. Continued usage without lease authorization constitutes a violation under state water rights regulations. Failure to comply will result in litigation, regulatory fines, and potential criminal penalties. HOA Resources, LLC. Ely watched from his porch that afternoon, sipping coffee, as Karen Mallow ripped open the envelope in front of a half-dozen board members. She laughed at first, then stopped, then read it again. Her face paled. The others leaned in, whispering, frantic pointing. Phones came out. Calls were made. Someone dropped a clipboard. Ely didn't smile. Not yet. By nightfall, the HOA's group chat, screenshot by a sympathetic neighbor, was on fire. No one knew who HOA Resources was. No one knew how the water permit had changed hands. But one thing was clear. Every home in Chestnut Ridge was about to run dry. And the only man who knew why was sitting on his porch, watching the pipeline that dared cross his pasture slowly turn to dust. By Monday morning, panic had settled in like fog across Chestnut Ridge. Garden hoses hissed but produced only air. Sprinklers refused to spin. Dishwashers sputtered and blinked red. By evening, the HOA Facebook group was in meltdown. Comments pouring in by the second. No water for 12 hours. Is the HOA even awake? This is what our dues pay for. I called the city. They say it's not their line. What's going on? Who the hell is HOA Resources? Ely watched it all unfold from the diner in town, where he nursed a black coffee and thumbed through screen captures from one of Karen's neighbors, an old friend of his late mother who still couldn't stand Karen's phony little queen routine. Karen had gone silent online, but at the clubhouse, she was imploding. Inside the building, she once ruled like a throne room. Karen paced furiously, eyes bloodshot, sleeves rolled up. Her phone was practically glued to her face. Find the legal thread, she barked at her lawyer Harold, who sat in a folding chair sweating bullets. There's no way some company we've never heard of can just steal our water. It's not theft if they own the rights, Harold murmured. I'm still confirming the legitimacy, but the county verified the filing. Karen froze. The county? You mean the government actually signed off on this? He nodded slowly. It's legal. Ironclad. She slammed her palms on the table. How did we miss this? How did we not know someone was buying up the aquifer? No one answered, but the silence spoke volumes. Across town, a tank truck filled with water rolled into the subdivision, privately contracted by desperate board members trying to maintain calm. But it was too late. Residents were already organizing a recall vote against Karen. A petition had hit 300 signatures in 24 hours. And then came the second letter, delivered by certified courier, again. This time, the logo of HOA Resources sat boldly at the top in deep blue. But this message was shorter, to the Chestnut Ridge Valley HOA. We are open to leasing a limited volume of water back to your community. Rates begin at $2,500 per household per month. Please note, all back-extracted water over the past 13 days is considered trespass and subject to retroactive penalty. We look forward to a professional discussion. HOA Resources, LLC. Karen stared at the letter like it was a snake coiled in her hand. $2,500 per home. Multiply that by 86 homes. Monthly. Whoever this is, she whispered, they knew exactly where to hit us. And just as the thought took hold, her eyes narrowed, something finally connecting in her head. Granger, she muttered. She didn't know how. She didn't know what. But she knew. Healy Granger had declared war, and not with rage, but with rules. And worse, he was winning. Karen Mallow stood in her designer boots, heels sinking slightly into the freshly packed trench dirt behind Ely Granger's pasture. She'd slipped past the property line just before dawn, wearing a windbreaker and gloves, far from her usual curated image. She wasn't here to file complaints or take photos. She was here to dig up leverage. She crouched beside the scar in the earth, where the HOA pipeline disappeared underground. It had been dried for a week. The pumps were silent, but something had been bothering her, something Eli had said weeks ago. You forgot who owns what's under it. Karen had laughed then, but now, every word echoed like a riddle she hadn't solved in time. The easement was old, sure, but the elevation of the pipe didn't sit right with her. It wasn't shallow, it was deep. Deeper than an HOA utility line should have gone. She yanked open the metal lid of a service valve cover at the edge of the trench. The chain creaked as it gave way, revealing a dark tunnel beneath, the pipe's main access. Karen reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. The flashlight beam pierced the dark and glinted off steel and something else. She'd froze. There, buried just beneath the pipe, was a second line, older, rusted, nearly fossilized from time. And beside it, a corroded tag barely legible through the dirt and time. Property of U.S. government. Strategic Reserve Line #17B. Decommissioned. 1972. Karen's heart stopped. This wasn't just an old water line. This was part of a federal system, decommissioned half a century ago and never removed. She snapped a photo, breath shaking. Her mind raced. If Ely's land still housed a forgotten federal water channel, and the HOA pipeline had intersected it without permits, they weren't just guilty of trespass. They might have triggered federal environmental violations. And worse, it meant the HOA pipeline never should have been dug there at all. Karen backed up slowly, adrenaline now keeping her upright. She had the leverage. She had something Ely might not even know about. But as she turned to leave, a voice spoke from behind a cedar post. You finally got your hands dirty, huh? Karen spun around. Ely stood just outside the fence, arms crossed, eyes like flint. She hid her panic quickly. So you do know what's under there? I knew there were bones, he said coolly. I just didn't expect you to be the one digging him up. Karen straightened, composing herself. This changes things, Granger. Oh, it sure does, Eli said, stepping forward. You didn't just trench my land. You tapped into something buried and forgotten. Something people in Washington don't like being reminded of. Karen narrowed her eyes. What do you want? Ely's voice was calm, but sharp enough to slice steel. I want you to back out. Publicly, admit the pipeline was illegal and shut it down before it buries more than water rights. Karen said nothing, but she knew this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about what history they disturbed and what might crawl out next. 3 days after Karen's discovery, a white SUV pulled into Chestnut Ridge. It bore no decals, just government plates and a dustless shine that didn't match the gravel road. Out stepped a man in a navy windbreaker with a silver badge clipped to his belt and a clipboard in his hand. He walked like a man who already knew the answers. His name was Inspector Alton Hale, and he smiled far too much for someone in environmental enforcement. Karen watched from her front porch as he approached her house, sunglasses reflecting the morning sky. She met him at the steps. "Mrs. Mallow," he said, voice friendly, smooth. "Ms.," she corrected. "Right? I'm with the Division of Environmental Infrastructure Oversight. We received a notification from the county registrar. Seems there's been a disturbance involving a decommissioned federal water line." Her throat went dry. It wasn't active. He grinned wider. "That's not the point. The line still falls under strategic reserve records. It's like digging up an old missile silo. Even if it's empty, it's still federal property." She tried to keep her composure. It was an accident. The HOA had a permit for the surface easement, but not subsurface excavation, he finished, flipping a page on his clipboard. "You tunneled too deep, and you crossed over the Granger property without proper mineral clearance." Karen inhaled sharply. "Is he pressing charges?" "No, not yet," Hale said, tapping his pen thoughtfully. "But he did file a notice of federal intersection disclosure. That's why I'm here." She blinked. He knew that pipe was there? Hale smiled again. "Let's just say Mr. Granger knows a lot more than he lets on." He stepped past her without waiting for an invitation, eyes scanning the neighborhood. "You know what's funny?" he added casually. "People think old farmers don't read, don't study law. But Granger? He's been laying traps for years. Quietly, patiently. Like someone waiting for everyone else to forget the fine print." Karen felt sweat bead at her neck. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Well," Hale said, pulling out a second folder and handing it to her. "You've got about 6 separate violations: unpermitted excavation, unauthorized resource tapping, structural interference, historical preservation neglect." He stopped and looked her in the eye. "And federal trespass." Karen's hands trembled as she opened the folder. The fines alone could bankrupt the HOA. But worse, several violations opened the door to civil litigation from any landowner affected. And she knew exactly who would file first. Hale turned to leave, but paused at the end of the porch. "Ms. Mallow," he said without looking back, "my advice? Don't try to bury this. Granger already knows where all the shovels are." He got into his SUV and drove off, leaving dust in the air and a war in Karen's mind. That night, she called an emergency board meeting. But the clubhouse was empty. The board had resigned. All of them. And in that quiet moment, Karen realized she wasn't leading a neighborhood anymore. She was standing alone in a battlefield she no longer understood. The clubhouse sat cold and empty, a ghost of meetings past. Karen Mallow stared at the resignation letters sprawled across the polished oak table, each one signed with regret and defeat. The board was gone. The HOA was paralyzed. She sank into a chair, the weight of the battle pressing down harder than the summer heat. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Granger Ranch. Noon." No signature, no clue who sent it. But Karen knew. She drove the winding road to Ely's property, heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. The sun was high, casting long shadows over the dry trench cutting through the pasture. Eli met her at the gate, calm and steady as always. "Why now?" Karen asked. He gestured to the cracked earth. "Because it's time to end this." She swallowed her pride. "You've won. The HOA is broke. The board's gone. The neighborhood is angry." Eli nodded. "I didn't want to win like this." Karen looked away, ashamed. "So what do you want?" He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. The original HOA charter from 1946. "Ever read this?" he asked. She shook her head. He smiled, the hint of something older and wiser in his eyes. "There's a last clause, forgotten, buried under decades of amendments and bylaws. It says the HOA can only operate with consent of all property owners. If even one owner objects, the HOA loses authority over land and resources within that property." Karen's eyes widened. You, me, the others. We own land here. Together, we can rewrite the rules. She frowned. But you don't want to shut the HOA down? No, I want to build something better. A community that respects its roots and its people. No more hidden pipes, no more secret water deals. Karen hesitated, then nodded slowly. Fine, but this time, no tricks, no traps. Ely extended his hand. Deal. The two shook, sealing an uneasy truce. As Karen left the ranch that afternoon, she glanced back at the fading sun casting gold across the pasture. Somewhere in the distance, the HOA pipeline sat silent, dormant for now. But the water beneath Chestnut Ridge was no longer just a resource. It was a symbol of power, of respect, of a community learning that the deepest roots run beneath the surface, and the smallest plazas can hold the greatest strength.